A routine mission turns deadly as the star in the distant galaxy mysteriously dims for 8 seconds. Amid this strange anomaly, Earth's highest command station reacts with confusion and unease, unaware of the terror that will soon unfold. The silence of space becomes the first signal of a confrontation far beyond their comprehension. As they scramble for answers, the unthinkable happens. The vastness of space had always been a quiet, cold expanse, the kind of void that swallowed time, crushed sound, and destroyed expectation. The control room on Earth buzzed with its usual the metallic scent of sterilized air mixing with the faint aroma of coffee brewing. Across the room, Lieutenant Kerrigan paced, the most mundane part of the job, monitoring the stars. Another day in paradise, Kerrigan muttered to himself, eyes flicking over the data on his screen. A mix of numbers, frequencies, and scattered anomalies. Nothing new, nothing surprising. His shift was supposed to end in 10 minutes. And then it happened. The blip. A sudden darkness appeared on the radar. It spread out, swallowing the light in the distance like an insatiable predator. For 8 seconds, everything went quiet. Kerrigan froze. The entire room did. The hum of machinery stilled. The glow from the monitors flickered as the signal disappeared. Then it was back. But this time, it was different. "Sir, we lost the star," came a voice from across the room, sharp and tinged with panic. Kerrigan's hand shot out instinctively toward his headset. "What do you mean, lost?" Kerrigan snapped, forcing himself to sound more authoritative than he felt. He had been on this station long enough to know that something had gone horribly wrong. It just went dark, Lieutenant, completely. No warning, no pattern," came the reply, the officer's voice trembling. "Run a diagnostic," Kerrigan ordered, but even as he did, his gut told him it was no system failure. Something else was at play here, something far beyond the station's capabilities. Minutes passed. The station's technicians worked feverishly, but it was clear the star was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. Out of the silence of that vanished star, something emerged. A signal, one they could never have predicted. A string of numbers, each more complex than the last. But the truly horrifying detail, it wasn't alien code. It was human code. "What is this?" one of the technicians asked, a whisper on her lips. "How is this possible?" Kerrigan's eyes darted between the screens. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. "Run it again." They did, and it happened again. The same numbers, the same string of commands. As the seconds ticked by, the room was thick with dread. The code wasn't random. It wasn't a signal from space. It was deliberate. It was a message. Suddenly, Kerrigan's voice broke through the chaos. "Get me the general, now!" The officer at the desk nodded quickly, dialing into the secure channel. It was clear the human command network wasn't ready for what was coming. They weren't ready for a message from a star that had died, and even less prepared for what would follow. "General McAllister on the line," came the crisp voice. "General, we've got a problem," Kerrigan said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. He could feel the cold sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "The star just went dark, and now we're receiving human code from the dead zone." McAllister was silent for a beat. Then, "What do you mean, human code?" Kerrigan let out a breath. "It's from us, General. It's from Earth." There was a long pause on the line, filled with the kind of heavy silence that made Kerrigan wish for the simple hum of the station back. "Put it through," McAllister ordered. The screen blinked as the sequence of numbers filled the monitor. The alien code was now replaced with the chilling familiarity of human language, as if the star itself had learned to speak. And it wasn't just random numbers. The code, complex as it was clear, and it spoke with terrifying precision. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. Kerrigan's pulse quickened. His hand shook slightly as he grasped the edge of the desk. That was no ordinary message. That was a warning, and in that moment, Kerrigan realized something he never could have prepared for. Earth wasn't the only one who had sent a message. That was before Earth even responded. The control room hummed again, but this time it felt suffocating. The glow from the screens bathed the faces of the officers, their eyes wide, glued to the data flickering before them. Kerrigan's mind raced, each passing second heavier than the last. What could this mean? Was it a trick? A strange, cosmic anomaly? The room was a whirlwind of voices, each trying to make sense of the impossible. The message had appeared on the screen, but what followed was worse than anyone could have imagined. The entire command station seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a moment of dread. "Lieutenant Kerrigan, the signal. It's coming from Earth," came a voice from the back of the room. The technician's face was pale, fingers trembling as he looked at the display. "What do you mean, coming from Earth?" Kerrigan snapped, still unable to comprehend the enormity of what was unfolding. It's human. There's no mistaking it." "The signal, it's from us," the technician stammered. Kerrigan's heart skipped a beat. "Are you telling me that this is from a satellite malfunction? A glitch?" His voice cracked, the panic rising in his chest. It was impossible. The implications were unbearable. There was no way a message like that could come from Earth. "No, Lieutenant, we've checked the source. This is not a malfunction. This is something else." The technician's voice wavered. "Something deliberate." Kerrigan stared at the screen, his mind swirling with chaos. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, struggling to make sense of the absurdity. It couldn't be real. There was no way Earth could have been capable of something like this, not with all the advances in space tech. Earth's capabilities, while advanced, weren't enough to communicate with the vast unknowns of space with such precision. His breath quickened, and his palms grew slick with sweat. Kerrigan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. He needed answers. Now! He glanced at the monitor, watching as the message, "Human Code," flickered again. There it was, as clear as before. The technician's hands hovered over the console. The numbers, they keep repeating. The message is warning us. He paused, swallowing hard, but it's also like a command. An order. Kerrigan's gut twisted. An order? From who? "We're getting a secondary burst of data now. It's changing," the technician said, his voice now tinged with fear. It's not just code. It's coordinates. I don't understand." Before he could finish, the lights above flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The hum of machinery seemed to pulse louder, more frantic. The control room, once so familiar, now felt like a cage. It was as if something was watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. Kerrigan turned sharply, facing the team. They were all waiting for him to act, and deep down he could feel the weight of the decisions pressing against his chest. "We need to respond," Kerrigan said, his voice hoarse, the words feeling foreign as they left his lips. "We need to verify these coordinates." There was a hesitation in the air, an uncertainty that clung to the edges of the room like smoke. The silence that followed felt unnatural, even suffocating. Kerrigan's mind raced, his thoughts flicking between protocol and instinct. The coordinates that had appeared on the screen were no ordinary location. They pointed to a distant part of the galaxy, one that no human ship had ever ventured into. It was far beyond their reach, far beyond anything Earth had ever explored, and yet there it was, a set of coordinates, as if they were being beckoned, drawn into the unknown. "Lieutenant," came a voice from behind, cutting through his thoughts. It was Commander Shaw, the station's top strategist. "Are we sure this is what we think it is?" Kerrigan met her eyes. Shaw was a seasoned officer, sharp and methodical. She wouldn't ask if she didn't have doubts of her own. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we don't have much of a choice, do we?" She didn't answer immediately, instead turning her gaze back to the screen. The message had become clearer. The code, human code, was unmistakable, and the coordinates were not a coincidence. They were being led somewhere, but where and why? "Do we prepare the fleet?" Shaw asked, her voice low but carrying the weight of 1,000 decisions. Kerrigan took a deep breath, his eyes glued to the screen as the message continued to repeat, a constant presence in the background of his thoughts. What was Earth trying to say? Was this some kind of hidden signal, buried beneath the layers of their own technology that they had never thought to look for? Or was this something far more ominous? "No," Kerrigan replied after a beat. "We don't prepare the fleet yet. We need to send a probe first, something smaller. We need to get more data." He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into something that wasn't just a signal. It was a trap, a test, maybe even a challenge. Humanity had always been underestimated by those who thought themselves superior, but now they were about to face something they couldn't comprehend. He turned to the communications officer. "Send a probe, but I want a detailed report within the next hour. We're not going into the unknown without knowing exactly what we're dealing with." The officer nodded, fingers flying across the console as he began inputting commands. Kerrigan moved to the observation window, his eyes drifting over the stars. The vastness of space was both terrifying and beautiful, a constant reminder of how little they truly knew, how fragile they were. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room mounted. Each second felt longer than the last, the silence more oppressive. Finally, the technician's voice broke through the stillness again. "Lieutenant," he said, his tone now strained. "The probe is on its way. But the signal, it's still coming. It's repeating one phrase now." Kerrigan turned sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. "What phrase?" The technician swallowed, his face pale. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't." The words rang in Kerrigan's ears, reverberating like a death knell. That wasn't just a message. That was a warning. And it was too late to ignore it. Kerrigan's gaze remained fixed on the screen as the technician's voice echoed in his ears. The phrase repeated over and over again, its meaning sinking deeper into his consciousness. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The words seemed to claw at his mind, filling him with a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. It was as if the entire universe had decided to mock their every move, to let them think they were safe when in reality they were already doomed. The room was silent, save for the hum of the machinery and the occasional clattering of keyboards. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Kerrigan could feel the tension in every corner of the control room. No one spoke. No one dared to. Everyone knew that something was wrong, something beyond their control, and they all felt it in their bones. Kerrigan glanced over at Shaw, who had moved to the far side of the room, her eyes scanning the coordinates on the screen. The calm demeanor she usually wore had vanished, replaced by the same uncertainty that plagued the rest of them. She turned to face him, her brow furrowed in thought. "Lieutenant," Shaw began, her voice low, "I don't know what's worse, the fact that we've received this message, or the fact that we're not the ones sending it." Kerrigan swallowed hard. The implications of her words hit him with the force of a freight train. Earth, the very home they had fought to protect, was not in control of this. Someone else had sent this message. Someone or something had found a way to communicate with them, and they were doing it on their terms. "We need to figure out who sent it," Kerrigan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The coordinates were clear, but the message was cryptic. And the timing. It was no coincidence. It had to mean something. Shaw nodded, her eyes narrowing in determination. "We'll send the probe, But I think we need to prepare for the worst. If we're not the ones in control, then whoever is, they're watching us." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything. Kerrigan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. He had always prided himself on being calm under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't a simple mission. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that there were forces out there far greater than anything humanity had ever imagined. The technician called out again, his voice rising with panic. "Sir, the probe's been deployed, but we're getting interference. It's like something's trying to block our signal. We're losing connection." Kerrigan's stomach dropped. The probe wasn't even a few minutes out, and already they were losing contact. He could feel the weight of Shaw's gaze on him, but he didn't dare turn around. She didn't need to say anything. He knew what she was thinking. The worst-case scenario was already unfolding, and they were powerless to stop it. "Patch us into the probe's feed," Kerrigan ordered, his voice steel, though his heart was hammering in his chest. "We need to see it for ourselves." The technician worked furiously at his console, his fingers flying over the keys. The screen in front of Kerrigan flickered, static dancing across the display. Then the image cleared. For a moment, everything seemed fine. The probe's sensors transmitted live data from the galaxy's edge, the coordinates matching the ones they had received. But something was wrong. There was an unnatural distortion in the visuals. The edges of the image seemed warped, as if something unseen was reaching out from the darkness, bending the very fabric of reality itself. "Report," Kerrigan demanded. The technician's voice was tight, laced with fear. "The probe's still transmitting, but, sir, there's something out there. It's moving." Before Kerrigan could respond, the image on the screen shifted, revealing a dark shape in the distance. It was massive, far too large to be anything they had ever encountered. The probe's sensors buzzed with activity, the readings spiking as the object loomed closer. There was no mistaking it. This was no natural phenomenon. This was something alive, something intelligent. The control room fell into a stunned silence as they all stared at the screen, the enormity of what they were witnessing sinking in. The object was unlike anything they had seen before. It was shaped like a star, its surface dark and shifting, as if it were a living thing, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to echo in their minds. It was surrounded by an unnatural energy, a field that distorted the space around it, bending light and time in ways that made their heads spin. "That's not a ship," Shaw murmured, her voice barely audible. "It's something else, something ancient." Kerrigan's mind raced, trying to process the impossible image before him. A star, alive and moving. It defied everything they knew about physics, about the universe. And yet, there it was, as real as anything he had ever seen. A chill ran down his spine as the realization hit him. This was the source of the message. This was the thing that had sent them the cryptic warning. And it wasn't just a message, it was a declaration. They thought it was mercy, it wasn't. The words rang in his mind again, louder now, their meaning more chilling than ever. Kerrigan's throat went dry as he watched the object continue to approach. His instincts screamed at him to pull back, to retreat, but there was nowhere to run. There was no escape. The probe's transmission flickered again, and then everything went dark. The feed cut off, the screens going black, one by one. Panic erupted in the control room, but Kerrigan didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the now empty display, his mind grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. "They're here," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. And just like that, Earth's silence had been shattered. But this wasn't a war they were prepared for. The enemy wasn't just advanced. It was something ancient, something that had been watching them for far longer than they could comprehend. And now they were no longer just observers. They were part of the game. and Earth had already lost the first move. The silence in the control room was deafening. It felt as though the universe itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Kerrigan stood motionless, staring at the now blank screens, his heart pounding in his chest. The probe had gone dark, and with it, their only, linked to the object that had been heading straight toward them. Shaw broke the stillness, her voice sharp and steady. "What the hell just happened?" Kerrigan swallowed, his throat dry. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't know what they were up against. The creature, the star, or whatever it was, hadn't just been an anomaly. It was a force, something beyond their understanding. And now it was closer than ever. "We've lost contact with the probe," Kerrigan finally muttered. "But the message still stands." He stared down at the screen, still displaying the phrase that haunted them all. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. Shaw's eyes were filled with the same fear that had taken root in everyone else's. "What do we do now? We don't even know what we're dealing with." The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone to make a move, to offer a solution, but no one had an answer. Kerrigan had always prided himself on being a man of action, but this was different. This wasn't a situation they could control. There were no protocols for this kind of event. There was no playbook for fighting something that defied all logic and reason. He turned to the communications officer. "Contact Earth. Send a warning. Let them know what's coming. We're not ready for this, but they need to know." His voice was steady, but deep down, a part of him was screaming to run, to find some way out of this. But it was too late for that. There was no escape from what was coming. The officer nodded, his face pale, and began typing furiously at his console. "I'm sending the transmission now, but I have to warn you, Lieutenant. If this is what we think it is, we might not have much time." Kerrigan turned back to Shaw, his expression grim. "We need to prepare the fleet, and we need to do it fast. Whatever this thing is, it's heading straight for Earth." Shaw nodded, her jaw set in determination. "We don't know what we're up against, but we've never been one to back down." Kerrigan's mind raced as he watched the communication officer work. The fleet needed to be prepared for the unknown. They needed every ship, every resource, every strategy they had. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it might not be enough. The reality of what they were facing began to sink in. Earth had always been the aggressor, the one who responded, who fought back, who overcame the odds. But this wasn't an enemy they could fight with brute force. This wasn't a battle they could win by sheer strength. The strange star, or whatever it was still out there, waiting. It was closer now, closer than ever, and the thought of facing it head-on, without knowing its true nature, was terrifying. Kerrigan glanced at the tactical screens, watching as the ships in the fleet began to power up, readying themselves for a confrontation they didn't understand. The energy in the room was palpable, like a storm about to break. Everyone was bracing for impact, unsure of what would come next. As the communication officer finished sending the message to Earth, he looked up. "Transmission sent. It's out there now." Kerrigan nodded, though he knew that Earth might not be ready for the truth of what was coming. This was beyond their comprehension, beyond their control. But they had no choice. They had to face it. "We fight," Kerrigan said, his voice firm, "but not with arrogance. We fight to survive." Shaw's gaze met his, and for a moment it was as if they were both trying to make sense of what lay ahead. There was no way to predict how this would end, no way to know if they would be able to protect Earth or if they would be consumed by whatever force had just made its presence known. But there was one thing they could control, their resolve. The moment stretched on, an eternity of waiting, of uncertainty. Then the first signs of the unknown object appeared on the horizon, the edges of it slowly taking shape against the dark expanse of space. It wasn't moving like a ship. It wasn't moving at all. It hovered, still and silent, like a dark omen. Kerrigan's pulse quickened. The time for decisions was now. As the object grew larger, a chilling realization gripped him. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. This wasn't a war. This wasn't a battle. They were facing the end, and they hadn't even begun. To understand the true nature of their enemy, the object moved, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, and Kerrigan's heart sank. It was coming for them, and that was before Earth even responded.